4 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Colorado. We are just hours removed from House Republicans voting to take away health care for 30 million Americans and put the insurance companies back in charge of our health care system. And it's back to business as usual for the GOP-controlled House. Yes, it's time to get back to more giveaways to the nation's wealthiest companies. Because when House Republicans aren't voting to take away health care from ordinary Americans, from poor Americans, they're voting for wealth care for the most profitable industries in the history of the United States of America. In fact, the majority continues to bring largely the same legislation to the floor over and over again. Only the name of the industry reaping the windfall changes. 2 weeks ago, the Republican majority voted to give away nearly all of our onshore public lands to the oil and gas industry. The majority has passed bills to put rigs off of our beaches in California, off of our beaches in Florida, off of our beaches in New Jersey, without passing any new safety requirements after the BP oil spill just 2 years ago. They have passed legislation to allow old-growth forests to be clear-cut and to hand over land to a multinational mining company without protecting Native Americans' sacred sites or local water quality. In fact, this Republican majority has cast so many votes to give away our public lands to the oil, the gas, the mining, and the timber industries, it's almost hard to remember which industry is getting a special giveaway each week. So I have a suggestion that I think could help everyone out there keep track. Each week we can consult this handy-dandy chart, the GOP wheel of giveaways, to figure out which industries are going to get their turn benefiting from handouts from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle on the same day they're going to take away health benefits from the poor, the sick, the elderly, and ordinary families in America. Let's see who the big winners are on the House floor today as they take away those health care benefits for ordinary people. Let's give it a spin here. Let's see what happens as we look at what is happening out there in this great land of ours this week. This week it's the mining industry, ladies and gentlemen. Come on down. You are this week's big winner in the GOP giveaway game. The mining industry is the big winner on this giveaway show here today on the House floor. That's because the bill that the majority is bringing to the floor tomorrow, despite being entitled the National Strategic and Critical Minerals Act, has absolutely nothing to do with developing these minerals. In fact, this bill is all about gutting the environmental safeguards and the proper review of large mining projects on public lands for virtually all minerals, including coal. Under this legislation, sand apparently could be considered as rare. Gravel could be a critical mineral. Crushed stone or clay could be a strategic resource. Even abundant minerals like gold or silver or copper could potentially qualify as a rare earth product under this bill and have lower environmental standards as a result in drilling for them that would endanger ordinary families again and their health. But of course they would never provide any health care benefits for them, because that's the other bill we're going to be having out here on the House floor and gutting here today. Indeed, the only rarities created under this Republican bill would be environmental protections or public input. Minute.
Gentleman's recognized for an additional minute.
And while this bill provides new giveaways to large multinational mining companies, it does nothing to change the mining law of 1872, ladies and gentlemen, which allows mining companies to pull taxpayer-owned hard rock minerals out of our public lands without giving Americans a fair payment. In fact, under the and 40-year-old law, mining companies can extract gold, silver, uranium, copper, and other hard rock minerals without paying taxpayers 1 cent in royalties for the minerals on the public lands of the United States of America. This law isn't just outdated, it's outrageous. These are the same people here who are saying we can't afford to pass a law which protects against pre-existing conditions in health care of ordinary Americans. These are the people here saying we can't pass a bill to protect against discrimination against women in our society. May I have 30 additional seconds? This law isn't just outdated, it is outrageous. On the game show The Price is Right, a $1 bid is strategic. But under the Republican giveaway game show, it is an actual price that these huge industries can continue paying for the rights to our public lands. The Republicans want to continue giving away grazing rights for a little more than $1 per acre on our public lands and allowing oil companies to warehouse public lands for $1.50 an acre. And after more than 250 votes against the environment and more than 110 votes to benefit the oil and gas industries, the American people are going to look at the record of this Republican majority and say, no deal. I yield back and urge a no vote on the Republican proposal.
Gentleman from Utah.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, if the gentleman would stay here a second, I understand from Congressional Quarterly that it is your birthday today. In which case, the gentleman from Massachusetts, I wish you a welcome, happy birthday. I appreciate the visual that you had. Unfortunately, as you tried to spin it, we realized it didn't work. So hopefully that is for your birthday party, because nothing else works. But I appreciate and I wish you a happy birthday. I'll yield him 30 seconds.
I thank the gentleman. And if it was possible to retard the aging process, that would be something that I think all of us could agree upon. But in the absence of that breakthrough medically, I thank the gentleman for his bipartisan wishes of a happy birthday.
Well, and as someone with whiter hair than you have, I understand what you're talking about. Let me yield 3 minutes, if I could, to the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, who does indeed have some of these industries in his district and understands full well what this bill is actually attempting to accomplish.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
I rise in support of the rule and rise in support of H.R. 4402. Tomorrow we will be considering H.R. 4402 that takes significant steps towards making much-needed reforms to our nation's mineral exploration and mineral permitting process. H.R. 4402 will force the hands of unyielding bureaucrats who seem intent on obstructing any and all mining, despite the detrimental effects that their actions have on the American people. At a time when China threatens to hamstring our military capabilities and cripple American health care, telecommunications, and renewable energy markets by controlling or reducing our access to rare earth minerals, we must take responsible action to ensure our access to minerals that are vital to our prosperity and security. In short, the timely licensing of mineral applications is critical to our nation's survival and to preserving the American way of life, which is opportunity for all to live a decent life. While investigating this issue, the Natural Resources Committee found that it often takes over 10 years for agencies to license mineral projects. This is simply unacceptable, but the forces that arrogantly stand in the way of these permits should be of no surprise to us. They are the same gang who routinely stand in the way of technological and scientific advancement. That's right, extreme environmentalists who some people, I remember Ronald Reagan said some of these people would rather live in a bird nest, some of whom are bureaucrats, federal bureaucrats, and some of them, of course, belong to activist organizations that seem to sue for sport and constantly stand in the way of any development of natural resources that were put here by God not to be sitting in the ground, but to help ordinary people live well. And the people who are stopping us from getting those minerals are standing in the way of ordinary people having a decent life. which is so important to the American, what we're so proud of here, that every American should have those opportunities. This mindset that puts the well-being of insects and above the health, safety, and quality of life of human beings has contributed to the 8.2% unemployment rate, and that's a low figure as far as I'm concerned. The real unemployment is far beyond that. But some of what the restrictions that we've had on our people that would like to use these natural resources for the well-being of our people has contributed to that unemployment. Unfortunately, however, we are here today to say that we've had enough. And I would say that, luckily, we have come to our senses. Even Republicans are willing. I'd ask for an additional minute.
Gentleman's recognized.
We're coming to our senses and having courage enough to stand up to this obstructionism by setting reasonable time limits for litigation and by setting a total review process for the issuing of permits to 30 months. 30 months is a very reasonable time. The reforms that we put in place will ensure that American mineral mining projects are not indefinitely delayed by frivolous lawsuits or by unwilling bureaucrats or by activists who, as I say, care more about the habitat of insects and lizards than they do about the well-being of the American people. I come from California, and I have seen, and I am a surfer, and I am in the water a lot, anytime I can get out there. And we have had offshore oil and gas reserves in the hundreds of billions of dollars available to us, but denied the people of California. Even as we cut the programs that our seniors and our children need, these radicals will not let us get to those oil and natural gas resources. That is a sin against those older people in California and the young people. We need to clean up that situation. Whose side are we on? We're on the side of ordinary Americans living a decent life, and that's what this bill is all about.
Gentleman from Colorado.
Well, in briefly addressing the gentleman from California, I would encourage him to support President Obama's proven track record of success in accelerating the access to public lands, a 17% improvement in speed of access over the Bush administration. And with that, I'll yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko.
Gentleman from New York, recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the gentleman from Colorado. I rise in opposition to this rule. There is no reason we could not have an open rule on this legislation. Well, unless there are amendments the majority does not want the members to vote on. Obviously, my colleague, Representative Holt, has offered one such amendment. The Rules Committee did not make his amendment to require companies that earn a profit mining on public lands to disclose their public donations in order. Why not? Vast amounts of secret money are ruining our democracy. It is the ultimate irony that free speech now has such a high cost. Our democracy has truly become the best that secret money can buy. That's not good news for the average voters who do not have tens of thousands of dollars to shower on their preferred candidates. Representative Holt's amendment would shine some light on this practice and ensure that the entities profiting from public resources are accountable to the electorate. The public, I believe, has a right to know who is funding our elections. Apparently, under this rule, they don't even have the right to know where members of this House stand on this issue. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back the remaining portion of my time.
Gentleman from Utah.
Could I inquire of the gentleman from Colorado how many additional speakers he has?
We have one remaining speaker at this point. We might have one other, but we have one currently here.
Thank you. Then, Madam Chairman, let me yield myself just 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized.
You know, to try and put things in parameter of what we're actually dealing in this bill, in the 60s to the 80s, the United States was actually the leader in the production of most of these minerals. Today, 97% of the rare earth oil, or 97% of the rare earth oxides, 89% of the rare earth alloys, 75% of, I can't pronounce the words, and 60% of the small cobalt magnets all come from China. We have lost that to them. And the reason for doing that is actually part of the bureaucratic delay. Once again, unlike a lot of comments that have been made about this bill, it doesn't pick winners or losers. It doesn't even change the process. All it does is tell the bureaucracy here in Washington to do it within 30 days, making sure that we have now sped up the process so that we now can do something instead of in 7 years, in 4 years. does not help reality. That's the point of this bill. It has nothing to do with other issues. It's only trying to get the process to be sped up so decisions are made in a timely fashion. With that, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's my honor to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman, and frankly, I would say to my good friend on the other side of the aisle that there probably could be, on many instances, common ground about the exporting of mineral exploration. Many of us would look to this as a positive strategy for creating jobs. I think it is important to say to my friends that, in fact, this bill is not even coming to the floor of the House today. It is not even going to be debated today. So that is one fracture if we talk about creating jobs. But another fracture is, of course, that we are substituting this legislation that might, if it was bipartisan, be able to move forward on creating jobs for wasting time and casting votes and debating on the Affordable Care Act, an act that has already proven that it saved lives, provided coverage for small businesses, exempted businesses under 50 persons, allowing them to have insurance, closed the donut hole on the prescription drug benefit, and saved billions of dollars. Here in this legislation, of course, one of the challenges that I have is that even though one would call this a bureaucracy, in actuality, it is expediting and overlooking the National Environmental Policy Act and therefore expediting necessary environmental review. It is being called an infrastructure project for purposes of the executive order entitled Improving Performance of Federal Permitting. That was designed to reduce permitting time. But more importantly, there are environmental impacts that should be considered. And so there is no opposition to creating jobs. There's no opposition to the value of our minerals. But I do believe there is opposition to expediting the process and excluding an environmental review, and more importantly, limiting this debate that might create jobs, might have opportunities for more amendments, might have more time on the floor, by what we're going to do today, which is frivolity, again, for those of us who believe that we can come together in a bipartisan way, work on the underlying premise of the Affordable Care Act of saving lives, expanding opportunities, and adhering to the Supreme Court's decision that this is the right law of the land that works for all people. I'd ask my colleagues on the underlying rule to oppose it, and maybe we can get down to the work of the people of the United States of America. I yield back.
Gentleman from Colorado.
Or Utah. Either state will do.
Oh, excuse me. Utah. Gentleman from Utah.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy to yield 5 minutes to the sponsor of this particular piece of legislation, who will do a couple of things, I hope, as he gets up there. One, he will remind us all that no environmental laws are waived by this process. It's about timing. And number two, he will clarify that when I said 30 days, I meant 30 months. It's why I don't talk well without a script in front of me. I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Nevada who has clearly understood this issue and put it together, Mr. Amodei.
Gentleman from Nevada is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from the Beehive State. I want to start out with, obviously, support for the rule. I think the rule is very open in the context of the legislation. For those that haven't reviewed the legislation, it's about 11.5 pages long. It's available out here. It's available online. I recommend you do it. Because when we talk about what it really does, it's not a wheel of giveaways. When you talk about strategic and critical minerals, here's some words from the bill. Strategic and critical minerals means minerals that are necessary. Here's some thoughts for ponder. National defense and national security. Now, do you know what those minerals were 10 years ago? And do you know what they're going to be 10 years from now? It's not meant to be as specific, and my colleague from Colorado is absolutely right. These are broad definitions. Because you know what? We don't do this every day. We're not going to check this every year and spend time like this on it. So when you talk about some flexibility there, it's not an accident. It's supposed to be broad. Here's another thing, strategic and critical. How about the nation's energy infrastructure? Kind of important if you care about things like energy, regardless of what side of the fence you're on. A couple other things. Strategic and critical. Those minerals to, here it is out of the bill, support domestic manufacturing, oh my goodness, How about support agriculture? Don't care about that. How about support housing, telecommunications? There was a mention of health care. Are those strategic and critical for the lifestyle or the health and welfare of this nation? Strategic and critical. Transportation infrastructure. Oh, and the last couple things, the nation's economic security and balance of trade. God forbid that we think about those things when we talk about the minerals industry. Are those broad? They absolutely are. But here's the part that nobody mentions. There is nothing in those 11.5 pages that say that a federal land manager can't, in response to an application, say, my first finding is that it is not a critical and strategic mineral. So if somebody comes in for sand and gravel and it's not that important, then guess what? Under the regulations that the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Interior are doing, I assume they'll give them the ability to make that finding. And if somebody doesn't like it under this bill, they've got 60 days to sue them on it. But we don't want you to know that because we're going to spin wheels and talk about the giveaway of the day. By the way, while we're giving stuff away, please show me in the bill where it says that you get a certain result. And when we talk about reducing the time, this says both sides can execute agreement that say 30 months. Okay? Guess what? It also says, by the way, if both sides agree, you can extend the 30 months. Now, for those who are familiar with the process and how that works, tell me how an applicant is benefited by a nice, crisp 30-month no. So if there's an issue about water quality, or there's an issue about anything that is being talked about, oh, and can I see the repeal sections on NEPA? I don't see that language in here. You know, I don't envy federal land use managers. It's a tough job. And when you look at this, see the red? That's federally owned property. This is to talk about the time it takes to process a permit request to mine on federally owned property. So with all due respect, and plenty of respect for my colleague from Colorado who's in this, knows that 36% of his state is federally owned. No disrespect to the birthday boy who's somewhere south of 1%. When you talk about economic development, regardless of whether you're riding an elephant or a donkey, guess what? This complicates it. So when you talk to those federal land use managers locally and you talk about things, just a couple more things here, because we can't have this. I mean, this is awful stuff if we talk about enhanced government coordination, permitting review, engage other agencies and stakeholders early in the process, coordinate and consult with project proponents, opponents. I mean, I'm sorry. And by the way, where's the part in the NEPA bill that was enacted in 1969 that said, what we're really trying to do here is see how long you can wait with that application pending. So guess what? If you get a no, you get it in 30 months. Or if there are legitimate issues that aren't taken care of in 30 months, why wouldn't you as an applicant say, you know what, we'll execute something, as provided in this bill, to say you get 6 more months? Going off to court is not the optimal thing for anybody. So when you ask yourself, what are we doing here? When I hear phrases like giveaways,
Seconds.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. We talk about additional giveaways or whatever. It's like nobody gets anything under this other than they get a time certain in the review process. And if there's more time needed, then guess what? It provides for that. What's the idea here? Collaboration between federal land managers and stakeholders, all stakeholders. If you're an applicant, you want a yes. But there's no magic in getting the 30-month no. My final point is this. When you talk about the changes that have been made by the present administration in permitting time, I find it incredibly interesting to hear in committee that that permitting time was actually less than what this proposes. This cuts nobody off. It's a good place to talk, and it gets rid of the part that is never in NEPA, which is we're going to outweigh you and hope you go away.
Gentleman from Colorado.
I'm prepared to close. Bad bill, bad idea, bad rule. I urge a no vote. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Utah.
Great bill, fair rule. I urge adoption. Move the previous question, yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time, and without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the resolution, and all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Opposed will say no. Opinion of the Chair. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted.
Madam Speaker,
The gentleman from Colorado.
on that I request the yeas and the nays.
Yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered, and pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 1C of Rule 19, further consideration on H.R. 6079 will now resume, and the clerk will report the title.
H.R. 6079, a bill to repeal the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act and health care-related provisions and the Health Care and Education Reconciliation Act of 2010.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, it's my honor to yield 1 minute to the Speaker of the House, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Boehner.
The Speaker of the House is recognized.
Let me thank my colleague for yielding and say to my colleagues I rise today in strong support of H.R. 6079, a legislation that would repeal the President's health care law. You know, when this bill passed, we were promised that health care law would lower costs and help create jobs. One congressional leader even suggested it would create 400,000 new jobs. Well, guess what? Didn't happen. This bill is making our economy worse, driving up the cost of health care, and making it harder for small businesses to hire new workers. You know, the American people were told that they'd come to like this bill once it was passed. Well, that didn't happen either. Most Americans not only oppose this law, but they fully support repealing it. The American people were told that taxes on the middle class wouldn't go up if this bill passed. Well, guess what? There are 21 tax increases in this health care law, and at least a dozen of them hit the middle class. Well, and let me just give you a glimpse of the damage that all these tax hikes will do to our economy. A tax on health insurance providers will end up costing up to 249,000 jobs, according to the National Federation of Independent Business. A tax on health care manufacturers will put as many as 47,000 jobs in jeopardy, according to one nonpartisan estimate. And then you've got the employer mandate, which will affect every job creator with 50 or more employees. Well, let's take White Castle Company in my home state. They say that the employer mandate would eat up most of their net income starting in 2014. And that's on account of just one provision in the law. And then there's the individual mandate that the Supreme Court has now ruled is a massive tax. And the Congressional Budget Office says that roughly 20 million Americans will either have to pay this tax or be forced to buy insurance that they wouldn't have purchased otherwise. You add it all up, the tax increases in this health care law will take at least $675 billion out of our pockets over the next 10 years. All this at a time when employers are just trying to get by. Listen, I think there's a better way, and that's why we're here today. Americans want a step-by-step approach that protects the access to care that they need from the doctor they choose at a lower cost. They certainly didn't ask for this government takeover of their health care system that's put us in this mess that we're in today. You know, at the beginning of this Congress, the House voted to repeal this health care law. It was our pledge to America, and we kept it. Unfortunately, our colleagues in the Senate refused to follow suit. And since then, we've made some bipartisan progress on repealing parts of this harmful health care law, including the 1099 paperwork mandate. But this law continues to make our economy worse, and there's even more resolve to see that it is fully repealed. Now, I think this is an opportunity to save our economy. And for those who still support repealing this harmful health care law, we're giving our colleagues in the Senate another chance to heed the will of the American people. And for those who did not support repeal the last time, it's a chance for our colleagues to reconsider. For all of us, it's an opportunity to do the right thing for our country. And I yield back.
For what purposes? The gentleman from Connecticut seek recognition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to yield 1 minute to our Democratic leader, the gentlelady from San Francisco, without whom there would not be an Affordable Health Care Act, and we greatly appreciate her efforts.
Minority Leader is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, more than 2 years ago, we put forth a vision for America's middle class to ensure health care would be a right, not a privilege for a few, but a right for all Americans. Today and yesterday, the past 2 days, as they've done more than 30 times in this Congress, Republicans are set to take away that right. Over the past 2 days, we have heard the talking points of the health insurance industry. They're trying to drown out the facts, and the facts are these. What is the takeaway from this debate? The takeaway is that the protections House Republicans are voting to take away from America's families. Today, up to 17 million children have the right to health care coverage even if they have diabetes, asthma, leukemia, or any other pre-existing medical condition. Put an X next to that. Republicans want to take away protections for children with pre-existing conditions. Today, all young adults have the right to get insurance on their parents' platform, on their parents' policy. Republicans want to take away that right from America's students and young people. Where do we have that? Coverage for young adults. Put an X next to that. Today, 5.3 million seniors have saved $3.7 billion on their prescription drugs. Republicans want to take away prescription drug savings for seniors. Today, small business owners have used tax credits to help them afford insurance for 2 million additional people, and the bill is not fully in effect. Republicans want to take away the tax credits for businesses to help their entrepreneurship and job creation. Today, nearly 13 million Americans are set to benefit from $1.1 billion in rebates from health insurance companies. Republicans want to take away those cost savings from America's families. Today, American women have free coverage. They have a right to free coverage for life-saving preventive care like mammograms. Starting in August, women will gain free access to a full package of preventive services. No longer will being a woman be a pre-existing medical condition. But Republicans want to take away those protections for women and all Americans. Many of across the country have heard Republicans' colleagues claim that very few people are affected by the pre-existing condition provisions of the law. The fact is, the Republicans are wrong. The fact is, you be the judge. 138 million Americans have a pre-existing medical condition. I asked our friends on the other side of the aisle, do you know anybody with breast cancer, with prostate cancer, with asthma, with diabetes? The list goes on and on. People with disabilities. With this bill that you have on the floor today, you will take away their right to affordable coverage. And that's why the American Cancer Society opposes this repeal effort. On behalf of 13 million cancer patients and survivors who need access to adequate and affordable coverage. That's why they oppose this repeal effort, the American Cancer Society. Do you already know the millions of people living with a disability? With this bill, you take away people with disabilities' right to quality, affordable care. That's why Easter Seals wrote that, quote, millions of parents of children with disabilities are breathing a huge sigh of relief knowing their children will not be dropped from their insurance. Do you know any parents of children with diabetes or asthma or childhood leukemia? Do you know any? With this bill, you will take away the right of these children to affordable care throughout their lives. That's why the American Diabetes Association, on behalf of the nearly 26 million Americans with diabetes, urged us to oppose this bill to, quote, protect people with diabetes who for too long have been discriminated against because of their disease. My Republican colleagues are taking away patient protections for millions of Americans, protections you, as a member of Congress, already enjoy. I think that that's an undermining of fundamental fairness. You repeal this bill, which means you keep your federal health insurance benefits while you take these patient protections away from the American people. What a valentine to the health insurance industry. When I think of people protected by this law, I always remember the powerful testimonial at a hearing last year from Stacy Ritter, whose twin daughters, Hannah and Madeline, are both cancer survivors. At 4 years old, they're twins. At 4 years old, both were diagnosed with leukemia. Hannah and Madeline faced stem cell transplants, chemotherapy, and total body irradiation. Yet over time, Stacy said, we ended up bankrupt even with full insurance coverage. Today, Hannah and Madeline are happy, healthy 13-year-olds. And according to Stacy, quote, my children now have protections from insurance discrimination based on their pre-existing cancer condition. They will never have to fear the rescission of their insurance policy if they get sick. They can look forward to a lower health insurance cost and preventative care. We passed the Affordable Care Act for people like Stacy, Hannah, and Madeline. We passed it for some of the people we heard from today at an earlier meeting, and Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to submit their statements for the record. Thank you. I urge my colleagues to think about them and to think about Stacy and her children when they cast a vote to take away their rights and protection. Here's what the Affordable Care Act is about: strengthening the middle class, honoring the entrepreneurial spirit of our country, putting medical decisions in the hands of patients and their doctors. This is about innovation, prevention, wellness. It's about the good health of America as well as good health care for America. It's about restoring and reigniting the American dream and living up to the vows of our founders of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, a healthier life, the liberty and freedom to pursue happiness as defined by your own passion, your own talent, your own skills, your own aspirations. If you want to start a business, if you want to be self-employed, if you want to change jobs, you are not job-locked, because your decision about your job, your career, and your life has to be predicated by your health insurance company. That's what this freedom is in this 1 week from the 4th of July that we celebrate with this bill. With this Affordable Act now to make the American dream a reality for all, Republicans must stop this effort to take away patient protections from Americans. Let's review them again. GOP taking away from Americans. This is the takeaway from this debate. Take away, the Republicans say, protections for children with pre-existing conditions. Take away prescription drug savings for seniors. Take away coverage for young adults. Take away preventive health services for women. Take away the no lifetime limits, so important to so many families in our country. We must work together on America's top priorities: job creation and economic growth. This bill creates 4 million jobs. It reduces the deficit. It enables our society to have the vitality of everyone rising to their aspirations without being job-locked, as I said. The American people want us to create jobs. That's what we should be using this time on the floor for, not on this useless bill to nowhere that does serious damage to the health and economic well-being of America's families. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill and let us move forward together to strengthen the economy and to strengthen the great middle class, which is the backbone of our democracy. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Majority Leader, the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, Chief Deputy Whip, Mr. Roscoe.
Gentleman from Illinois, recognized for 1 minute.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. And, Madam Speaker, do you remember these lines when the President was pitching the health care bill? He said, "If you like what you have, you can keep it. It will not add a single dime to the deficit. This is absolutely not a tax increase, and it will bring down premiums by $2,500 for the typical family." The gentlelady from California a moment ago spoke about things to take away. Well, let's take this away. Let's take away the reality of this new health care law that has done this. It is now clear that 20 million Americans are likely to lose their employer-based health coverage. The law will cost $2.6 trillion if fully implemented and add over $700 billion to the deficit. It has $500 billion in new taxes that are triggered towards the middle class, and the average increase in family premiums doesn't go down $2,500, it goes up $1,200. Here's what we should take away. We should take away this albatross in the economy. We should repeal it. We should replace it. And here's the good news. The voters get the last word in November. Stay tuned.
Gentleman from Connecticut.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield 3 minutes to our distinguished whip from Maryland, a person who understands what it means to make it in America.
Gentleman from Maryland, recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank my friend. Repeal it and replace it. For the 31st time, we have a repeal with no replacement, no alternative, no protection offered by my Republican colleagues. Not one. You could, of course, introduce legislation that said, we're going to repeal and replace with this. You haven't done it. You haven't done it. So the American people have no idea. We're on the floor today with the distinguished gentleman from Michigan, who himself and his father before him said a half a century ago, Americans need the security of having the guarantee of access to affordable quality health care. That's what we did. Madam Speaker, after the landmark Supreme Court ruling upholding the Affordable Care Act, Americans are ready to move on. Yet here we are again, voting for the 31st time on a bill to repeal the health care law with no replacement, no alternative, no protections. That's not what we ought to be focused on. Americans want to work to create jobs and to grow our economy. According to a Kaiser Family Foundation poll last week, 56% of Americans believe that opponents of the law should drop attempts to block its implementation. It's time for Republicans to end their relentless obsession with taking away health care benefits from millions of Americans. If this bill were to pass, insurance companies could once again discriminate against 17 million children with pre-existing conditions. If it were to pass, 30 million Americans would lose their health insurance coverage. It would take away $651 each from 5.3 million seniors in the Medicare donut hole, making their prescription drugs more expensive. 360,000 small businesses would no longer be able to claim a tax credit to help cover their employees. And 6.6 million young adults under 26 would be forced off their parents' plans, left to face a tough job market with the added pressure of being uninsured. The Republican repeal bill would take away these benefits and end these cost-saving measures. And after 31 votes, as I said, no alternative, nothing, no bill to read, no plan to follow, no security to offer. Repealing health care without an alternative would add over $1 trillion to deficits over the next 2 decades. I don't say that. The Congressional Budget Office says that. It is occurring in a place of a vote if we could be taking on legislation to create jobs. Nothing about jobs this week, nothing last week, nothing scheduled for next week or the week after. It's a waste of time.
Gentleman's recognized.
It's a waste of time. Why is it a waste of time? Because the Republican majority knows that it will not pass the United States Senate, and it would not be signed by the President of the United States. So it's a message bill. It's politics as usual. Spurring the base while spurning the average working American. I outlined several proposals yesterday that are bipartisan in nature and ought to come to this floor immediately. It's called Make It in America. Let's vote on those bills. Let's vote on those bills to create opportunities, not this one to take them away. Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and let us work together constructively for a better economic future for our people, more economic security, more health care security, and a better America. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Majority Leader, the gentleman from Virginia.
Madam Speaker, thank you. I yield 3 minutes now to the gentleman from Texas, the Republican Conference Chairman, Mr. Hinchling.
Gentleman from Texas, recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, I've heard so many of my Democrat colleagues come to the floor and question, why are we here to vote to repeal the President's health care program? Let me offer a few reasons. Number one, the American people don't want it. The longer people have to know this bill, the more intense they are in wanting to see it repealed. Reason number two, we hear from our friends on the other side of the aisle, well, the Supreme Court said it was constitutional. Well, the $5 trillion of additional debt that they and President Obama have foisted on the American people, it's constitutional, but, Madam Speaker, it is not wise. Seniors know that the President's health care program cut $500 billion out of Medicare. $500 billion. The Independent Payment Advisory Board, one of 159 boards, commissions, programs to get between Americans and their doctors. The Independent Payment Advisory Board, there to help ration health care for our seniors. Another reason. Now, I just heard the distinguished leader of the Democrat Party get up and say we should be talking about jobs and the economy. Well, Madam Speaker, these are the very same people who told us the stimulus bill would help jobs, would help the economy. The stimulus bill was not a jobs bill. Repeal of Obamacare is a jobs bill. Talk to any small business person across America who has 40, 45 workers, and they'll tell you, we're not going to go to 50. We're not going to do that. We're not going to hire those extra people. Talk to a tool and die manufacturer like I have in my district in Jacksonville, Texas. Half their business comes from the medical device industry. You know what? He told me that Obamacare, the medical device tax, is going to force him to lay off workers. The employer mandate cost jobs. The Congressional Budget Office, which the gentleman from Maryland just cited, they themselves said this will cost 800,000 jobs. Private economists, 1 to 2 million. Chamber of Commerce just did a survey of small businesses. 74% said this makes it more difficult to hire. So after the President just turned in his 41st straight month of 8% plus unemployment, the worst jobs and economic performance since the Great Depression, maybe it's time for a true jobs bill, Madam Speaker, and a true jobs bill is to repeal Obamacare. The American people do not want it. We can't afford it. Job creators are losing jobs by it. Let's repeal it, and repeal it today. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Connecticut.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from South Carolina, a leader in the Democratic caucus.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Lawson, for yielding me the time. I rise today in opposition to this partisan charade to repeal the Affordable Care Act. This is the 31st time the majority has orchestrated a vote to repeal, in whole or in part, this very important and long-awaited law to increase accessibility and decrease the cost of quality health care. Fortunately, the other body rejected this ill-fated effort the first 30 times, and this 31st time will be no different. Why then are we having this debate? Do my Republican colleagues really believe that a majority of the other body is now ready to take from children with diabetes the right to coverage on their parents' health care policies? Do my Republican colleagues really believe that a majority of the other body is now ready to take from children who are seeking employment the right to remain on their parents' health care policies up to their 26th birthday? Do my Republican colleagues really believe that a majority of the other body is now ready to take from a woman with breast cancer or a man with prostate cancer the right to keep their coverage once they get sick? The American people are smarter than that. They know the deal. They do not wish to be taken down this primrose path for the 31st time. The American people want stability in their lives, security for their families, and safety in their communities. Americans want us to stop jerking them around. They cannot have stability in their lives when we are shipping American jobs overseas. They cannot have security in their homes when they are fearful of getting sick. They cannot have safety in their communities when their teachers, policemen, and firefighters are being laid off while we engage in symbolic episodes. I ask my colleagues to reject this charade and let's vote to restore the American dream. I'll yield back.
The Majority Leader, the gentleman from Virginia.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Scott.
Gentleman from South Carolina, recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Why are we here? We keep hearing that from my friends on the right. Why are we here again today? And the reality of it is simple. The numbers keep changing, and it simply does not add up. A long time ago, in 2010, a long time ago, the estimates were $900 billion will be the cost of Obamacare. 2 years later, now the estimate is at nearly $2 trillion. Well, how do we fund this? Everybody wants to know this. A program that is already financially strapped, Medicare. Obamacare takes $500 billion, $500 billion out of Medicare. What does that mean? Well, to me, as a grandson of a grandfather who's 92 years old, 92 years old, what happens when we take $500 billion out of Medicare? Well, the answer is clear. There's a 15-member board called IPAB, the Independent Payment Advisory Board, that will then recommend cuts to Medicare payments for doctors, hospitals, and other providers. In other words, my grandfather's health may be in the hands of a 15-member autonomous board who will decide what happens to his health. That's wrong. And if you look in Obamacare, what you'll find is that $317 billion of new taxes off a 3.8% tax on dividends, capital gains, and other income. You'll find $110 billion on the middle class for folks who like their health care and want to keep it. Oh, no, 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 no. They can't keep it. And then you find another $101 billion.
Madam Speaker, I yield an additional 30 seconds.
Without objection.
Another $101 billion on annual tax on health insurance providers, not paid for by those folks who make more than $200,000, but paid for by the hard-working, everyday folks like my granddaddy and my mama. Those folks who struggle to make their ends meet, $100 billion of new taxes. But if you need a medical device, another $29 billion of new taxes. There is just not enough time, Mr. Leader, to talk about all the taxes that can't be articulated in just 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Connecticut.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself before I defer to the Vice Chair of the caucus. Just 30 seconds to respond here. As Mr. Andrews has very patiently and eloquently pointed out, that the $500 billion that was just discussed by the previous speaker is something that the Republicans have voted on twice. Perhaps they didn't get a chance to read that bill, as they sometimes claim about health care on this side. With that, I defer to the Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus, Javier Becerra.
Gentleman from California is recognized for how long?
2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the chairman for yielding the time. It took 19 presidents and 100 years, dating back to President Teddy Roosevelt, to open the door to all Americans to quality health care that is centered on the patient-doctor relationship. 105 million Americans who will fall ill no longer will have a lifetime limit on the coverage they receive from their health insurance company. Up to 17 million children today who have pre-existing conditions cannot be denied coverage by an insurance company. 6.5 million young adults under the age of 26 today can stay on the health care policy of their parents. 5.5 million seniors today received an average of $600 to help cover the cost of their prescription drugs when they fall into the so-called donut hole. 360,000 small businesses in America, men and women who own their own business, got assistance through a tax credit to help provide health insurance coverage to their employees. 13 million Americans will benefit in insurance premium rebates from insurance companies who must now show that they're spending the premium money they get from those Americans for health care, not on paying CEO salaries or not on profits. $1.1 billion in rebates for 13 million Americans. And perhaps the most important thing that most Americans don't recognize, the $1,000 that those of us who do have health insurance throughout America, that we pay in premiums to our insurance companies to cover care that's not for us and our families, but for those who don't have insurance, the free riders, that will start to drop. Those are the things that are at stake. Yet, while it took 100 years for us to get to this point, it has taken our Republican colleagues only a year and a half to vote over 30 times to try to repeal these patient rights and protections. Patient rights and protections that President Obama promised, this Congress delivered, and the Supreme Court affirmed. My Republican colleagues say that to repeal and replace these patient rights and protections is the right way to go. But the only thing we have seen from them on this floor is all repeal and no replace. It's time for this Congress to get to work on the most important thing before us, getting Americans back to work. Let us vote this down and get to work. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Virginia.
Madam Speaker, I now yield a minute and a half to the gentlewoman from Washington, the Republican Conference Vice Chair, Mrs. McMorris Rogers.
Gentlewoman from Washington is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
And I thank the leader for yielding. I rise in strong support of this legislation today to repeal Obamacare, because the control of health care and health care decisions belong in the hands of patients and families and their doctors. Obamacare was a big government takeover of one of the most personal aspects in our lives. And I come to this debate as a mom, as a wife. I have 2 children, one that was born with special needs. And I understand firsthand, talking to so many within the disabilities community, and I hear their fear of not being able to find the doctors, not being able to find the therapist within the Medicaid programs, within TRICARE, because of the government. These are government programs that are too often making false promises. I think about my parents who are signing up for Medicare and the over $500 billion in cuts to the Medicare program. And in Eastern Washington, it is very difficult to find a doctor right now who will take a new Medicare patient. Because of Obamacare, my family, like millions all across this country, are facing longer lines, fewer doctors, and lower quality of care. We can and we must do better. If we don't repeal this law, the results are going to be disastrous. CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, has already estimated 20 million Americans will lose their employer-provided health insurance. Healthcare premiums continue to soar. Innovation and life-saving technology and devices are being threatened. The first step to putting individuals and families back in charge of their health care is to repeal Obamacare, and I urge support.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. Gentleman from Connecticut.
It gives me great honor to introduce the Dean of the Connecticut delegation and a voice for compassion who believes passionately about this health care law that's in effect for the American people. Rosa DeLauro from Connecticut. I yield a minute.
Gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized for 1 minute.
What will happen if the House majority succeeds in repealing the Affordable Care Act? 17 million children with pre-existing conditions will once again be denied coverage. 6.6 million young adults under 26 will no longer be covered by their parents' insurance plan. Insurers will be allowed to discriminate against women again. Charge them more, deny them coverage because they've had a cesarean section, leave maternity and pediatric care out of their policies. The donut hole reopens, costing seniors billions of dollars. 360,000 small businesses lose tax credits. Americans will have to pay out of pocket for preventive services like cancer screenings and wellness exams. Preventive services that could have saved the life of Celia, a 50-year-old East Haven woman who died from breast cancer because she simply could not afford a mammogram. And 30,000 Americans will lose their health insurance and be left to their fate, while every single Republican in this House will maintain their health care coverage. Repealing the Affordable Care Act is wrong. It was wrong the first time. It is wrong the 31st time. Welcome to Groundhog Day in the House of Representatives. This majority needs to stop working to put American families at risk, start working to make our economy healthy. And I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Gentleman from Virginia.
Madam Speaker, I now yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Georgia, the Republican Policy Committee Chairman, Dr. Price.